everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Omnichannel Marketer. Today, I'm very excited to have a friend on the podcast today. Rick, it's so nice to be chatting here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
So, Rick, why don't you just, start with your current role, but then, take us back to where you started your career, and then we can kind of build into where you are now.
Sure. So currently I'm a partner at a men's apparel brand called Howler Brothers. We're based here in Austin, Texas, and overseeing business development, which for us is a lot of our partnerships, our collaborations, any sort of outside interaction. For us, what it really means is sort of everything outside of our normal course of action. And so I tend to get all the weird projects that we only do one time or only do one time every 5 years. But then like I was saying, a lot of stuff that involves outside parties. And we do a lot of partnerships and collaborations with other brands and other companies and artists and things. So everything in that realm.
And, where did you start your career on the brand side?
Well, I started for lots of years not having anything to do with brand. I started in private equity and then I traded commodities. And then my first real foray, I was always a brand fan and sort of like considered myself somebody that loved or, would really espouse certain brands because of certain things. The first time I actually worked for it, what I would consider a brand was at Yeti Coolers. And I got to know the founders when they probably had 8 employees at the time and were working out of a shared warehouse. And I met them and then I started helping them with some projects, and that quickly snowballed into a lot more stuff into why don't you just come on full time? But it was a much smaller business than it is today.
Hmm. And Yeti with 8 people, what was your role at that time? Yeti, I've definitely heard of it.
Yeah, well, they didn't, believe it or not, they had no marketing, dedicated marketing person at all. And so really it was to set up and build out and orchestrate everything that is marketing. They were doing some of those activities as it related to sales, like wholesale, outside sales, and as it related to certain other things. But in reality, they hadn't done or even really approached it like a lot of brands had. And so it was a really cool opportunity for me to come in. It was a killer product that it was in an area that I loved in the outdoors. And so it was really easy for me to come in and say, oh yeah, let's go do this. It was just of interest. I couldn't get enough. But we set out to do a lot of things. There were a lot of things sort of on the to-do list. And then there was a lot of things that as we kept growing and figuring out we could do these or this was working, let's do more of it. And so it just sort of escalated and snowballed from there.
What was working in the early days of Yeti on the marketing side? Obviously, like product. So, yeah, what?
Yeah. Well, what's funny is that it was such early days of that product. And in those days, we didn't have the stainless drinkware. It was just hard coolers. And so honestly, people started to hear about them, but if they didn't have one, they hadn't heard of it, hadn't seen it, that they really had to like see it. So getting people in front of coolers was a big thing. Also, one of the things about that time is there was a lot of stuff that they just weren't yet doing. So for example, when I first started working for them, they had a website, but they had been so focused on wholesale, like opening up that channel, that they weren't even selling online. And so that wasn't even, that's pretty simple, but it takes a lot of effort, to get there. But like, okay, let's start selling online. And what does that mean from an execution standpoint? What does that mean? And then we got to go set some rules in place, so we're playing fair with all the retailers, all those things. And then, another huge thing that worked back then that we discovered that worked was that in those days, if you had a Yeti, you really felt like you were on the inside. You had the superpower, you were on the inside of this club, but the hard part is they're big, heavy coolers. And so you don't just walk down the street with that. And so it was harder to
Mm.
sort of carry that with you as a member of a tribe. And so we really pushed hard into merch. And now everybody does merch, but back then it wasn't obvious. And we ended up building out a really big merch business. And even pre tumblers and soft sided coolers, like I think at one point we got it up to like, you know, 12% of revenue or something. So it was like pretty significant. And one of the things that was really critical, that was like cool to understand, was that not only where if you had a cooler, did you want the merch because you wanted people to know, you wanted to be a part of the tribe, but the other thing was that aspiring tribe members who didn't yet
Mm.
have a cooler, they would buy the merch. Like they want to be in the club. And then another thing was that it just became such a thing that it became a real like feeder system of people becoming actual customers, like cooler customers. And so we just kept propagating it with new colors and new items and new stuff. And a lot of those, the merch items, but also the accessories to the coolers, like mounting systems and things like that, seat cushions. A lot of the retailers at that time weren't carrying those accessories. So even
Mm.
if you bought your cooler from a retailer, we were sort of the hub to get both accessories, like so you can like fit it out however you want it, and then also all the merch. So that really became like, it was like, frankly, it was like giant funnel building of like, even if these customers bought it here. And so then we even pushed further and to say, okay, well then how do we let people know that better? So we put a catalog in every cooler, and we started putting, barcodes and QR codes before they were ever cool or people knew what to do with them, on the catalog and on the big sticker on the front of the cooler. So even if you were just sort of window shopping at the store, you could still scan it or you could still check it out.
Really
So those
interesting.
were some of the early things that really worked, and really we found some traction.
I also, recall that Yeti has that registration form. So was
Yep.
that kind of part of the time that you were there?
Yeah, that we started that program, and that was actually a really enlightening switch. But before that, we didn't really know. We didn't know where someone bought it unless we sold it to them directly. We didn't know where they got it. We didn't know if they were the first owner or the fifth owner. And it was hard to sort of validate that warranty. And so we started coming up with a way, said, okay, how do people register? So we built an online system where they could come on and register and tell us about their cooler. And then we know, and then we have it. And then we also understand from them where they bought it. And then, you can even segment out your audience to say, okay, who bought a cooler at a retailer, but then has become a really good online customer, who bought it at a retailer and then we never heard from again. But there's all kinds of ways you can, segment that out, and market to them differently and do different things. So,
Hmm. What
yeah.
a great idea.
Well, it seems pretty obvious now, or it's almost like baked into a lot of the stuff that people do, or a lot of products people come up with. But back then, especially for, a rather high price point item, it was somewhat novel.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, obviously you're familiar with Bridge, so I think in many ways we're productizing what Yeti home built, and kind of helping build that funnel. Super interesting. So post Yeti, where did your career take you next?
Well, I think the best answer to tell you would be that I ended up joining my now company, Howler Brothers, and I've been here now for and a half, 10.5 years. And I had a little short, brief stint in between the two. That was somewhat of a disaster and just a hot mess. But in reality, I met my now business partners, Chase and Andy, when I was at Yeti, and we became friends. And I was a fan first, and I just loved what they were making, and I loved the brand that they had started to form, and we became friends. And Chase was here in town, and so we hit it off, and we'd go have beers once a month and talk shop a little bit. And so I sort of became they asked me actually to be an advisor before I ever decided to leave Yeti. And then, long story short, we ended up hammering out a deal and made it work. And now I've been here for over a decade.
And how did you apply some of what you learned at Yeti to kind of building more, the go-to-market marketing function at Howler Brothers?
Yeah, that's a great question. We definitely are in the outdoors arena as well. Very different product offering in that we only make apparel and not gear or accessories. And so it just, so with that in mind, people have a little bit different buying cycles, a little bit different like adoption cycles. And then you have things like there's just a lot of personal preference in apparel. And that could be like the aesthetics of it, the design, color, but also the fit. And it's honestly, fit is one of these things. It's like a Rubik's Cube with 7 colors on it. Like you can never really solve it, but you can get us really close, and you can make some brand decisions to say, okay, this is where we want to be, or where we think we can best serve. Some of the other things I think that we carried over, or that we have in common, I should say, and we're still like, I still have a lot of friends that are at Yeti, and we've done several projects with them and continuing to do projects with them. So that's all very amicable. But I think one of the things is we have a lot of overlap on the activities that we love. And therefore, we have a lot of overlap on audiences who love those activities. And that, taking it one step further, we share several brand ambassadors, and a lot of the same events we'll show up at, or a lot of the same communities. And so even just this past weekend, we sponsor an event. We both companies sponsor this event, a fundraising nonprofit fishing tournament on the Texas coast. And it's a really important event that some of my friends put on, and both Yeti and Howler show up in a pretty big way to support this. And so we have a lot of overlap, a lot of friends, and it's just a lot there. But I think that one of the things that if you take a step back and look at all that, we might be both sort of focused on the same community or audience, but we're solving very different things for them, or we're offering very different things. And so we can't just hammer at them the same way, and we can't just do exactly the same things. What may work for them may not work for us. And so there's a lot of like, oh yeah, I've played this game before, but this is a different team with a different attitude. And so we have to have a little different perspective about how we approach it.
Yeah. And I think, the tools available and the time is different and the product category is different.
Oh
So
yeah.
it
Oh
sounds
yeah.
like, like Yeti was a wholesale first brand that, came online, and then had this, grew a D2C channel. Is Howler Brothers really D2C first? And, how, yeah, I mean, apparel in general tends to lean heavier D2C.
Yeah. That's a great question. You're right. Yeti started wholesale first and then added D2C. Howler Brothers started D2C, and the idea was just we'll do D2C in perpetuity. But it wasn't long thereafter that the retailers came knocking. And so even before I got here, the guys had to sort of quickly scramble and figure out, okay, how do we do this? What does this look like for margins? And what does the program look like? And sort of piece it together. But I would say now that wholesale is a big part of our business. It's right shoulder to shoulder with D2C, and it's super important. And I think, I know you're such a fan of omnichannel, and I think it's actually super critical.
Mhm.
And I think this is maybe relevant too for your audience, because, in this day and age, it's so much faster and easier to start a company and spin up a brand and all the things. And you can do it like literally in 48 hours. You can have all this stuff spun up online. It really, if you really take a discerning look at what you're making and offering and what your disposition is, and your ethos, then I think it really matters to look at, okay, well, how does my audience shop? Where do they shop? Where do they shop for what? And so really looking at that soberly and honestly and trying to figure out, okay, well then that should help inform how where I go from a channel mix. And look, there's definitely things change over time, and also you will have to adjust to the market or adjust to COVID or adjust to the economy. But I think it's super important, and that each of those channels can have a different function. It may not, channel A might be where a customer falls in love with your brand or establishes an emotional connection. But channel B might be actually where they get it most frequently.
Yep.
You
And so
know,
what are those channels for Howler Brothers?
well, I would definitely say our direct channel is probably where people establish a deeper emotional connection, but they may get it at their local store.
Yep.
And on the flip side of that might be that someone might discover us in a store and say, well, I like this. I want to learn a little more. And maybe that's from a hang tag, or they take it home and they buy it and they take it home and they kind of dig in more on social, or like, oh man, look at all this stuff. And they really find out more about the brand, not just the product.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's where you have really an opportunity lies. No matter which way they find you or first, there's a real opportunity to expand with other channels, and other channels can play a big part of that.
How would you define what brand is?
This is a really good one. And I'm very opinionated on this, but
I love opinions, especially
okay. Let's start off with what is not.
Mm.
Brand is not a company. That is wrong.
Mm.
A brand is not a logo. That is not what a brand is. A brand is not like your style guide, your colors. That is not a brand. Those are children of a brand. But in reality, what a brand is a personality. It is a character. And so if you are, I'm gonna just make up a thing, but a pencil. Your company makes pencils. Well, there's plenty of other pencil companies out there, and they have this disposition or this voice or this tone or this representation. We want to be the fun pencils. So that really, we need to bake that in, not just the way we look. That's fine. We can make them bright colors or sparkly or whatever, but to really make it sing, what we need to do is say, okay, who are we as the brand as a character? If we're a character in a movie, how do we walk? How do we talk? What's our attitude? How do we react to things? How do we treat other people? All those things like help shape what is the character, which really is what is our brand. And so if you can go, I firmly believe if you can go identify that up front and really put a lot of shape to this and thought and do that first. If you do it correctly, which almost no one does, then I'm saying the sequence. If you do the sequence correctly, you would do that first and then come up with a logo and then come up with colors and then come up with all this other stuff. But most people do it sort of cart before their horse, which is fine. It's not insurmountable. But then what's also equally as important is to determine what you are not. How do we not react to people? What is not the way we do things, or where do we not play? And I think it adds this whole other dimension of definition to who you are. And it makes you stand out more than just sort of being like a little blurry fuzz.
That's trying to be everything to everybody, and you can't
Just
possibly.
trying to be everything to everybody,
Mm-hmm. So what is that
Yeah.
for Howler Brothers?
Wow. So for Howler, we've gone through this several times, and it can evolve over time. But really, for those out there who want to go through this, there's some great guidebooks. One in particular called The Archetypes of Branding, and it's more like a big coffee table workbook that you can get, and it'll help walk you through. It helps you arrive at like the archetype that is the best fit for your brand, and you still have to add color to it and all that, but it really helps to shape it out and help you to understand if this is who we are, then also what are our weaknesses and what are we not? and it helps you just be more informed, and it helps you not just like beyond just the founder or the executive team. Like you can put it on the wall, and then everybody knows, and then everybody understands who you are, and your your employees and your partners and all that stuff. It's really crystal clear. For Howler, we do a lot of what we do is based in like what we've established as our sort of brand tenets, our brand pillars. But the first one is brotherhood, and for us, that's really about a shared community, and that means it's we, not me. And so that gets to we as a team, we as a community of people, we like inclusive of our customers, our audience, all of that. And for us, we want it to ring all the way true. So a lot of what we do is a shared experience. It's not me climbing this mountain alone. It's look at what we did, or look at this trip that we took together. Forget whether we made it to the mountain or not. It's about the fun times along the way that we shared. And that's really sort of the genesis of Howler Brothers from when Chase and Andy first had the concept. They knew they wanted it to not be man versus nature, but really about we and this time together. And, when you go take a trip with your friends, you may not remember this thing or that thing, even if that was the purpose of the trip. But what you remember is the funny stuff that happened on the way, getting the flat tire, someone's bag got lost and they had to buy clothes at the gift shop, like all that stuff. Like that's what people remember.
Yeah.
So that's those are the fibers we wanted to weave the fabric out of.
Hmm. Makes sense. Yeah, I mean, as you're kind of telling that, talking about that, I'm, thinking of my own memories that of, my mom forgetting her suitcase or losing her suitcase
Yeah.
on the way to the trip. Like it's like that's what you remember about the trip in the funniest way. I hear that. So you've had these like really cool brand experiences, and then along the way have started investing. So would love to hear a little bit more, and I guess you also come from this investing background on the PE side. So would love to hear about, how you think about the investment side, and what you invest in and what you're interested in and why.
Yeah. I was very fortunate, and like, shoot, I think it was in the year 2000. My brother-in-law, who's my good friend, he is a serial tech entrepreneur, and at the time was living in the Bay Area when everything was popping off and everybody's starting tech companies out there. And we had the opportunity to invest in one of his friends' companies. And that was the first time that I had ever really thought about anything like this. Neither he nor I at the time could really afford it. And so we teamed up together to do it together. And so we've been doing it together ever since. And now it's well over 20 years. And you learn a lot along the way. And I think some of my favorite things about investing, particularly in early stage companies, is that it is fun, it is interesting. There is this like hope in it all that you could like go tackle the world. And you usually that stage of company building and those type of tackling tough problems, that tends to attract really cool, interesting, driven, awesome people. And what we have really found over time is that the most important thing is to really believe in the people you're investing in. And that good people with an imperfect idea will iterate on the idea and get that part better, and they can overcome a lot. But an awesome idea with subpar people is never going to get there.
Yeah.
And so, like, really just focusing on the people. And so, what that means for us is like it's been this really killer opportunity to get to know and interact with some really awesome entrepreneurs and operators and just great people in general. And I think also, and I'm a big believer in this, that has allowed us to learn in parallel. So as we were operating on this plane, we also got to invest on this plane up here. And so as time goes by, we're doing both. And, typically doing it like nights and weekends type of thing, but it really allowed you to learn in like sped up, like in double time. And so I think being an investor made me a better operator, and being an operator made me a better investor. So I'm a big fan of the sort of duality of it, but I know it's not for everybody, but it's something that we have really come to love. And we started super modestly, and we're still very modest about it. But I think with time and practice and reps, you get better at it. You start to refine what you like and what you're good at. And then with that also, sometimes more opportunities come with that as well. But it's one of my absolute favorite things.
Yeah, I can, resonate with that. My background was as an investor, and I always felt like I didn't know enough because I started my career as an investor. And now being an operator, I actually can see that perspective that I would be a much better investor and, do some angel investing just because there's ideas. And, I think what I miss about investing is that when you're in it as an operator, you're so in it.
Oh man, you have to be.
You have to be. Sometimes I literally have no idea what's going on in the world because I'm so in it. My husband will be like, "Did you know that this happened today?" And I'm like, "I do not know that that happened today." And so the cool thing about being an investor is that you pull back and you see how others are approaching different problems, but you can apply that same framework to your own business. So I can completely see how the two kind of build on one another. Something that, I like to think about and reflect on in my own career that I'd love to ask you is like, what do you think you are really great at? Because, I mentioned you said like
Oh,
you learn more about what you're great at.
that's a tough question. I think what I've found about myself, and this has even come as I've sort of refined my role here at Howler and even outside of Howler, you know, well, I'll just back up and say when lots of us have to go through sort of those assessment things where it's like the axes and it's like what you like and what you're good at, and you try to get everything up here in this top quadrant.
Yeah.
And so I think what I have been able to sort of either be good at or develop getting better at is really about connecting with people. And I think there's a lot of ways you can apply that. And it doesn't have to be in like a sales way. It can be actually in a friendly connection kind of way, in a helpful way. And so I think that is, and that may be a little broad, that is where I find that I sort of get energy from, that I love the most, and I'm drawn to, and I want to do more of that, and that I've been able to put that to good use, whether it be in my role here at Howler Brothers or as an investor, and being able to connect with people. Sometimes, like as an investor, that sometimes that means connecting with people you didn't know 5 minutes ago and figuring out a way to either help them or get involved with what they're doing, where really you don't really have any business being there, or you write a way smaller check than everybody else that they have, that they're talking to, or that's on the cap table. And so you really don't deserve to be there. But if you can find a way to connect with them, then you can probably find a way to help, and then maybe find a way to get included.
I get that. And I've seen that.
You're good at that, by the way.
I enjoy doing that as well. So I really can resonate that with that. Topical focus. What is something that you feel, bold or passionately about?
Man, I mean, that's a really good question. There's a few ways we can go here with this. I mean, you know, the thing that matters most to me is my family.
Mhm.
Um, and I would say, but if we were to just put that aside, it's sort of an obvious answer for a lot of people. So if we could put that aside, I care a lot about the environment.
Mhm.
And as an outdoorsman, like, and someone who loves to spend their free time fishing and being outdoors and doing all those things, I want to preserve this and protect this for generations to come. I want my great great grandkids to get to enjoy it the same way I do. So that's, I think, something that's always sort of top of mind for me. Always trying to do better on that front, or contribute to causes that will help do better. And then, but another thing, and this gets back to your previous question, another thing that's really important to me uh, is people. And one thing I've just always been fascinated with are people and why people cluster together for different reasons. And sometimes that's from, a place, like where you're from, hometown or your home country. Sometimes that's like more of a cultural reason of, could be a religion. It could be something else, and a language. There's all those things. And I think, and I think that where you can find those and the good in those communities or in those groups, there's also some really cool opportunities to connect with people, but also to, frankly, do well and do good.
Moving into our lightning round.
Okay. I'm going to sit
Favorite
up for this one.
omni-channel brand?
Oh, man, that's a great question. Okay. It's maybe a little bit of a cop out because it's just one of my favorite things ever, but is Haribo Gold Bears.
Okay, I don't think that that's a cop out. If you said Yeti, that may have been a cop out.
Well, no, I'm not going to do that. That's too egotistical. But I would say, yeah. And look, it's not necessarily the easiest, like, or the first thing you would think of, like, from an online standpoint. But I love the product so much that it sort of pulled me into that. And I think they do a different, interesting way of being on there. And so
Well,
it's probably not what most people would answer, but
it's not where I thought you were going, but I think it's a thing that you wish you can change about our industry.
I would say that one of the things that I think it's gotten so much easier over the past several years, like we were saying earlier, to start a business or to take an idea and actually bring it to life. The internet has helped tremendously with that, and just the reach that it has, and then all these sort of things that used to be very analog are now digital or quasi automated, and you can do them like that and inexpensively. And so a lot of that is great. I think one thing that though we've gained all this speed and sort of ability to do things cheaper and faster, but it also can at times spit off a lot of waste. And I think what it has sort of trained us is to be myopic consumers in a way that, oh, I'm in it for this, or what I care about is that. But with a lot of people maybe don't consider, okay, yeah, I can get that, or it's inexpensive and that scratches my itch, or that solves my need, or checks the box. But what all went into getting that? And is that, if I even just pause and zoomed out, is this the best way to go about it? And me as a consumer actually get to vote on how this happens. And so if I think about it better, and a great example is like eliminating single-use plastics. Most instances, it's not necessary. It's just become this byproduct of us wanting it more, faster, cheaper, and plastics are cheap and they are lightweight and they are helpful in a lot of ways, but refilling your water bottle is way better
Yeah,
than burning through single-use plastics.
totally. Favorite podcast?
Oh man, so good. So I have a few. It sort of depends on like which side of my brain we're talking about, or God, if I had to pick, I'm probably this is a little bit self-serving, but I'm probably going to say my friend Ed Robertson's Mountain and Prairie podcast. He's just such an awesome human, and the way he interviews people and the people he has on there, but really even beyond that is his ethos and what he cares about and how he brings that to life and the way he's able to find it, and even just people start banging down his door to be on the show. And he's just a great human, and I love listening to Ed. He's great. Mountain and Prairie.
I'll have to check that out. Favorite newsletter?
If I'm being real honest, it's Axios Pro Rata. It's like my daily deal dive, and I feel like, it's kind of like the skim, even more refined into this one little wedge of the pie that I can read, and I feel like, okay, I don't know everything, but I got a decent understanding of the stuff that went down.
Totally. That makes complete sense. Favorite social media channel?
Well, I mean, based on time spent, it would have to be Instagram. I don't know if that's probably more just personal,
Opinion.
but not necessarily like for the company.
Yeah, that's fair. Favorite book?
Man. Okay, so since we're on the Bridge podcast here, I'm going to say, I'm going to shout out to another friend, and I'm going to say Call an Audible by Darren Roberts. And
Okay.
it's his true story, and it tells how he went from Harvard Law School to becoming a coach in the NFL with no coaching experience. And it's totally fascinating. And every entrepreneur should read it because it is about overcoming the impossible
Mm.
and defying the odds. And not only is it's this incredible story, and everybody would love the story from like a human perspective, but from a real life, like goals and sort of even business perspective, he does this killer job of breaking down. He tells you the chapter, here's what happened, and then he breaks it down and like summarizes it, and then gives you 3 takeaways that you can use in real life. And it's just fantastic.
Wow.
And he's just a great human. He's awesome.
I'm going to have to check that one out. Any
Yeah.
events that you're planning on attending either this year or next year that you're excited about?
Well, in a few weeks here, we have the Texas OU football game in Dallas, Texas. That's a big one, but that's an annual event. I just got back from an event I mentioned. It's a big nonprofit fishing event, and that several of my buddies put on, and it's such a wonderful event. It is so much fun, and they raise so much money doing it, and it is absolutely remarkable. And they put so much effort into it. That's called Borracho Pescador. But that just happened. So if I'm going to look ahead and say, man, I'll give you a good one. This is my oldest daughter is a freshman in college, and this is going to be our first parents' weekend.
Oh, that's so fun.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's a big deal.
yeah.
So
So we're super excited about that.
that's a ton of fun. Rick, where can people connect with you?
The man, LinkedIn is great. Instagram is great. Howler Brothers website. You know,
Perfect.
I'm around.
Amazing. Well, Rick, I really enjoyed kind of learning more and kind of sharing your story. So thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Kate. This is awesome, and I hope we get to do it. I hope we get to meet together in person again soon.
I agree. If you liked this podcast, follow me and the Bridge page on LinkedIn and Twitter for hot takes and tactical advice. If you really loved today's episode, we'd love a review on the podcasting platform of your choice, Apple Podcasts or Spotify. Thanks for listening.